All right, so I've been asked about Barndominiums quite a few times, and I find that there's a big difference in what people mean when they say Barndominiums. So recently I had an interaction with a prospective client. I asked them to define it, and brilliantly they did so by sending me a listing, a real estate listing. And it literally was a post-framed building that looked like a pole barn from the outside, but inside had been finished into living space. So classic definition of a barn. Uh, I want to read to you what I wrote in response and then show you some pictures that kind of demonstrate what I'm getting at. So let's start by reading it. And it was a very nice home inside, by the way. It looked fantastic. By this definition, a barndo is a post-frame building that has been finished out for living space. As a rule, post-frame structures are inexpensive since they eliminate foundations, space structural members um, further apart than normal. So instead of a stud at 16 inches on center, you have a post at 8 foot on center, and then you put horizontal boards across. We call those purlins. Those are about 2 foot on center. They also are a simple design, typically just 4 corners with one ridge line, no valleys, no hips. In general, the exterior finish is pole barn steel, which is a fairly inexpensive siding and is strong enough to span the distance between those purlins. So those purlins, again, are horizontal. The metal siding is vertical, and that allows that to happen. Typical sidings would not go on a pole barn, on a classic pole barn. So post frame is the technical word for how those are framed. We typically just call them pole barn. And then the term barndominium came about when people started finishing out these barns for living space. Now, post frame buildings got popular for good reason. They are they're commonly used for storage barns and for animal shelters due to their lower cost, a faster construction time, and they just didn't need to be as durable as a typical house because of their use. Storing something, just keeping it out of the rain. They didn't need to be conditioned for space. Strength didn't matter a whole lot. Just keep them out of the rain, keep them out of the wind. And they work great for that. But as people started finishing them out, they started realizing a pole barn can be just as beautiful as any other home. So far, so good. And if you keep a post frame building in its sweet spot, in other words, what it's good at, you can build at a lower cost than traditional construction methods. But it's for this reason that banks and townships can get pretty squirrely when people try to pull a permit or get a loan for a barndo. I recommend just going away from that word because it has negative connotations. So the townships, they don't want to build a bunch of barns in their area, which tends to bring down property values and attract a certain type of person and keep out other types of people. So townships don't want to do that. The banks don't want barndos because they need to be able to sell it for enough value to recover their investment. If you default on your mortgage, they take over it and they'll sell it, and they want to be able to get their money back out of it. So whether I like it or not, or whether you like it or not, a barndo or a post frame building is cheaper to build, and therefore it's worth less on the open market to most people. Where things get difficult is when you start to add other concerns to a post frame building. When we start to add other things that they're not really designed for or great at naturally. Aesthetics. Maybe we decide we don't want vertical pole barn steel. Comfort. If a cold edge of the floor is not something you want, they start to get a little bit more expensive. Efficiency. Keeping them airtight and ventilated right for health and for efficiency. Strength. I'll show you some pictures that deal with that a little bit. Durability, not having to worry about rot or wood posts in the ground is a big, big factor. And strength, disaster resistance. In the example that was shared with me, they had actually put in a precast storm shelter that just kind of gets buried. And then there's a section of the floor you pull up and you can walk down in if a tornado is coming. But otherwise, a post frame building is quite unsafe in very high winds. So we've been involved in building a couple and kind of came to realize that once we start adding those other concerns or other factors that people typically have, maybe I should say typical expectations for a custom home, barn doors get complicated and expensive pretty quickly. If you're looking for typical build quality, they aren't cheaper as a construction method. But if you're fine accepting a reduced build quality, lower durability, lower disaster resilience, kind of standard barn aesthetics, then barn doors might be just right for you. So let's start with some of the pictures. These aren't necessarily going to be in a certain order, but we'll open up with this one. And this is showing the upper end of a gable wall. Now this barn had 16-foot ceilings, but then we did what's called a cathedral truss, where the truss itself is sloped up. So the center of the ceiling ended up something like 20, 22 feet up there. It was ways up there. Two things you'll notice that are different if you're used to normal post frame construction is, one, these posts are 4 foot on center. So that's twice the spacing of normal. And that is just to get this tall wall to a reasonable strength. When the wind blows, we don't want that wall moving 3 inches in. We also want it to kind of be able to stand there at over 80-mile-an-hour winds, because that does happen on occasion. Another thing you'll notice, maybe you won't, these posts are PSLs. They're not your standard 6x6 post treated wood. They're also not even your standard laminated board where you have multiple 2x6 just glued together on top of each other. So that the spacing and then the material is different. You'll also see here, if you're looking close, that these purlins are a little bit more substantial. So yes, they're a 2x4 purlin, but then on top, laid on edge, is another 2x4, and that is to give greater strength to that wall, again, so it does not flex. That is what was needed on this higher wall and with the wind loads that we're going to experience in the area. After design, the client in this case added a number of factors or came up with a number of concerns. One was, well, I don't want posts in the ground anymore because I don't want them to rot. I've heard of people having to replace them 40 or 50 years later. That's not something I want to deal with in my home. Can we do a foundation? Well, yes, we can, but then you're reducing a lot of the advantage of, or a lot of the reason for going with post frame. So in this case, you're looking at a foundation here, and then that foundation is furred out. In addition, you see a bunch of vertical studs here because the client decided to add horizontal wood to his inside of his room. I don't think we have any drywall in this place. It's all tongue and groove pine. You want a rustic look. These details came up later. That made us put a lot more lumber in, and we had to do vertical studs like normal. So in essence, this ends up being 2 wall systems. You've got the post frame in the background there, and then you've got a stud wall in the foreground. So the materials that you end up finishing with will really impact that. If you're going with post frame and you want to maximize for cost, then we want to find materials that can be installed vertically, not horizontally. All right, what's next? Where is my arrow button? There's one. Try it. Okay. I guess next thing we'll talk about is comfort or efficiency. So in this case, we ended up using spray foam, which it is one of the costlier methods of insulating, but it's pretty important, in my opinion, in a post frame building because they are inherently leaky, um, and not easy to seal up on the outside. You can't just put up zip sheathing and tape the seams to get them tight, because they don't have sheathing like a typical home does. Again, they're not designed or built for efficiency. They're designed and built for creating a bunch of space inexpensively and fast. So when you start worrying about comfort and health, air quality, spray foam becomes a necessity to eliminate that air movement. Or maybe not a necessity, but a really cost-effective way to. So here you're seeing one of those rooms that I showed you in a picture earlier, finished out. There's all that horizontal tongue and groove, and that is what required the vertical studs. Also, again, after construction was well underway, the client decided to, in his gym portion, add 8-foot-high walls of carpet, which required a good solid backer. So we ended up having to fur those walls out again for that 3/4 inch plywood. That's what you're seeing here. So again, just extra work in order to make it meet the standards that you would typically have in a custom home. Also, we care a lot about water management details, and so when we put things through the wall, we're going to do it right. So here you see we have, behind here, actually you can't see it, but there are seals put in place, rubber gaskets that these penetrations then go through, and we want to make sure everything is flashed around rather than just drilling a hole in the metal, and hoping it's good, hoping the water makes its way out, not in, and bugs and so on. Again, when we have a standard of high quality, this isn't an extra expensive detail. We do this on all of our homes, but when you're looking at a post frame building, it is an extra expense because this block needs to be nailed into something, and a horizontal purlin every 2 foot on center, there's usually not something there to nail it into. Just some more pictures showing that cathedral ceiling, but also showing the 3/4 plywood in place now. And lots of spray foam. And I think that's it. So hopefully that gives you guys a pretty good idea of what is involved in converting or finishing out a post frame building for living space. If you just keep them to what they're good at, then they're very effective. But if we start adding a normal standard of quality, comfort, health, efficiency, strength, durability, you're probably not going to want a Barndominium. Let me know if you have any questions, guys. For now, it's Jake with R Value Homes.